Okay.
Cool.
So it's okay. So I said it go live. It says it can take up to 2 minutes, which is bullshit, but I don't know. It's saying it's live. So we are indeed live. We have 11 people watching. 11 people came for the two of you. Can you imagine that?
My
Probably
cup
came
runneth
for you.
over. Yeah, yeah. You would have had 20 if I wasn't here, but okay.
Nonsense, nonsense. You both are loved. Um, all right, so I do want to say hi to everyone. Mostly Scott Duke and Speed of Sound, or was that Answers of Atheism, for forcing my hand. I had no choice but to do the stream. Speed put me on blast.
Nice.
Titan, thank you for coming. James, glad to see you in my chat instead of vice versa. James is always live. I can't believe James stopped a stream to actually come to mine. It's amazing. The beautiful Stephanie Helms, who's been a huge asset to the community over the past, oh God, forever. Um, Kalasia 789, Germania. Thank you for waking up and gracing us with your presence. The lovely Jenna, yada yada. All right, and so today, yeah, kind of what I was talking about earlier, and I was saying this to Michael earlier. I was in Speed Stream, and what I notice in the community is that people often conflate free will and free choice, and so it gets them off in these like kind of tangents about free will, which just really triggers me. uh, But then Speed put me on blast and he was like, well, why don't you come into the stream? And I'm like, I'm not a pedantic philosophy nerd. So I'm going to find two and make them talk about it.
Oh man, I'm not really sure I'm the right person to talk about it, but I'll be more than happy to throw my non-existent hat into the ring.
Mike, I would like you to chill, talk about your credentials, and then we'll pass it on to Nick.
Sure. Well, I do have a background in philosophy, but it is not in the philosophy of free will. So, that qualifies me to talk about this as much as a heart surgeon is qualified to talk about cancer. So, my name is Michael, obviously. I'm a history and philosophy educator. Educationally, background in philosophy and history. Currently working on my PhD in philosophy, but it's in the philosophy of the history and philosophy of time. It really has very little to do with this, but I'm always more than happy to talk about philosophy in general. So, yeah, Maya, I really appreciate you the invite and you setting this up and hosting it. Yeah, I've been enjoying the channel so far. So, thank you.
Oh, awesome. Nick, chill. What are your credentials?
My name is Nick Souter. I have BAs in philosophy and psychology. As to philosophy, the my concentrations were religion and law, philosophy of law. So free will somewhat applies in each of those, depending on how you choose to look at it. But it's been a while since the BA, but I certainly have debated a lot on various philosophical issues. It's been a while since I've actually been to school for it, but yeah. So that's the limit of my credentials. A BA certainly is not a PhD, but I have some.
No, yeah, I'm totally out of my breath here. My bachelor's degree is in psychology. It actually doesn't even say that. It
Nice.
just says bachelor's of science. My major was psychology. My master's degree was in organizational psychology and employee development, which is more or less a motivation degree. I study human behavior and trying to get, oh God, people to motivating people to work well together, which is so fun. Um, what I tell everybody is I kind of just need free will to not exist so that my field can exist. It's really hard to study randomness. And so, if free will is a thing, then you really don't have a branch of psychology at all. Um, so it's something that I just kind of take as a given and run with that. But it is a hot topic in the community. I'm sure you've all seen a lot of people talking about it. And I was kind of wanting to get kind of your understanding of what free will is. And I know there's a kind of couple of different types, I believe, like compatibilism and libertarian free will and determinism and something I'm forgetting.
Those
You
are the
too.
big three. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. All right, I'm all caught up. All right. Well, let's get the big one out of the way. The one that is obviously true. What is libertarian free will?
Go ahead, Nick. You can start.
I'll cede that one to you. I'm the closest I am is a compatibilist, determinist compatibilist. I'll let you. You're probably more qualified to talk about the libertarian free will.
Sure. Appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. So the idea of free will in general is relates. All of this goes back to action, our ability to make one choice over and against another choice. So the idea of libertarian free will, not it's a little confusing because we have a political party called libertarians, not super related. I think they just derive from the same word, is why they're named the same. But libertarian free will is the idea that you can freely choose. And by action here, most philosophers are talking about moral action, right? The ability to choose between right and wrong, or the ability to make a decision that has moral consequence. And libertarian free will is the belief that we have the ability to choose between one option and another. That free will is a faculty of our brain, of our psyche, of our consciousness. Ow, just hit my elbow. But that's the general idea. I think we could probably start there.
All right. So since you're a compatibilist determinist, we'll let you explain, Nick.
So the idea of free will is that there is you can actually make a choice, and a determinist would essentially argue, no, you can't make a choice, an independent choice, because all of your choices are actually determined as a consequence of everything that factored into your decision-making process. There's no randomness. There's no metaphysical interjection of something that does not that is not a naturalist process involved in your decision making. So if that's the case, how can you have free will? Having said that, people who believe in free will have there's been sort of a compromise, which is to redefine free will, which I think is worthwhile, and to not think of it in a sort of metaphysical sense. And by that definition, then we do have free will. So we don't have free will in this sort of ultimate truth, capital T way, but we do have it for all intents and purposes in terms of how we act. So there's a definition of free will here that I like. It's the power of acting without constraint of necessity or fate, the ability to act at one's own discretion. Well, so even though I'm a determinist, and even though I don't think there's anything random, and I think all choices are necessarily, and the thought experiment that I use to discuss this sometimes is going back in time. So I ask you to pick a number between 1 and 1,000. If we then go back in time 10 seconds and have you choose again, would you choose the same number or a different number? If you would choose the same number, then what exactly is free will? How did you actually make a choice? Your brain actually processed and came up with that number in some way, and there wasn't any metaphysical you that chose outside of that. It was a deterministic choice. But having said that, there was a choice made, right? I mean, in terms of the observation and us interacting with you, there was a choice made. So, of course, this gets into what is you, what is discretion, what is all these other things. But as a compatibilist, what you basically say is, look, when I flip a coin, for all intents and purposes, it's random. Is it really? Well, no. It's determined by, the amount of pressure applied, the temperature of the air, the fluid friction between the coin and the air, and all this other stuff. But that none of that matters. None of us are capable of determining, what it would have been before the flip. So it works beautifully for determining, which child gets to go first at an event or whatever, and you say it's random, and it is for all intents and purposes. So a compatibilist says, okay, look, there is no free will in the ultimate sense, but there is free will in every sense that's useful to really discuss it. And so a compatibilist will say, yeah, there's such a thing as free will, but no, not really.
Yeah, and that's like the there's very few arguments like in favor of like putting forward the idea of free will, but the central argument of libertarian free will for why free will exists is this sort of intuitive understanding of our ability to make choices that Nick brought up. So it's an appeal to it's kind of an argument from like this idea of common sense or basic intuition, which the gist of it would be that, listen, we believe that we have free will just because we make free choices on a a daily basis, hourly basis, right? And so this idea of freedom is throughout the history of philosophy is kind of this intuitive thing that we all believe that we have, and that's what the libertarian free will proponent would like appeal to, right? Is like, hey, we make free choices all the time, like, and this is just what free will is, but a little bit more nuanced. But that's the gist of it.
The best example I ever heard of, Christopher Hitchens. Of course, we have free will. Well, of course, we believe in free will. We have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think free will is, I don't know, again, it gets largely conflated with choice.
Hmm.
What can you guys describe your understanding of the difference between free will and free choice?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll start us off real quick. I mean, so to me, this relates to the question of like, why does this conversation matter? And philosophically, the reason why the discussion of free will is so important is because of its direct link to ethics. So ethics is the branch of philosophy that deals with questions of what's right and what's wrong, and they're like major ethical schools: deontological ethics, utilitarianism, all that good stuff. Well, starting in the early modern period, there was this strong argument that in order for human beings to be moral, or in order for human beings to have the ability to do ethics, that it required that human beings be free.
Hmm.
That in order for me to be held accountable for my ethical actions, I have to have the ability to actually make those ethical actions. So, to begin with, I would say that when we talk about free will and we talk about action, we're first and foremost talking about like moral action, the ability to choose between right and wrong. Libertarian free will, I mean, and these discussions in general aren't, I mean, there is this question if you're talking about like hard determinism, like whether or not every single action's been determined. But people that are arguing for free will are making the argument with respect to morality. At least I think that's like the upshot. That's why it's important to have free will, is our ability to make moral actions. So this idea that like freely choose between whether or not like I pick up my coffee cup is kind of like secondary or incidental to the conversation as a whole.
Yes and no, but I think that it's kind of the things that people think of when,
Hmm.
I don't know, like in this community, people tend to go down a hard determinalist, or like
Determinist.
Determinist. Hmm.
determinist. God, it's tripping in my mouth. You understand what I mean? Yeah, a hard determinist kind of perspective where it's like, no, I was meant, these words that are coming out of my mouth right now were always meant since the Big Bang to come out of my mouth. I was always meant to, you know, drink my coffee, take the shower, and I go back and forth on that. I think that people have what I call autopilot, which is kind of where I see like hard determinism. Like when you like when I wake up, okay, well I have this routine. I get up, I use go to the toilet, I turn on the coffee maker, brush my teeth. Um, Usually I've taken a shower before, but sometimes I get thrown into the mix if I didn't. And then I get dressed and I go to work, and it's usually this very set thing that I routine that I put myself in because I need to, because I'm not awake. I'm just so not a morning person. If I don't have a routine, I will procrastinate my way into being late every single morning. Um, but we do see people making different choices when they're more alert, when they're actually focused on something. We see people making different, I would say different choices, meaning, let me think. I used to work at a restaurant, and restaurants have items. You see it on the menu, and this is how it comes. And this woman said she wanted to change the cheese on a breakfast salad. And I went to the chef, and I'm like, okay, she wants this cheese instead of that. And he was like, she wants what cheese? And I said it back because I'm just regurgitating. And then he was like, well, what's in the salad? And then I kind of go through and remember it's like, oh, and now that I'm thinking about it, it's like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Let me go back and ask her again what she wants. But if I had actually been focused on what she had said to me, I would have done that at the table the first time because she asked me to put in the cheese that was already on the salad. So it, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
I want to try to unpack two things. First, I would very strongly agree with what Michael said earlier.
mhm,
Uh, I think it dovetails with essentially metaphysics.
mhm,
The question of is there something supernatural that either influences our ethics or influences what defines us as people. And intuitively, there's metaphysical certainty. And most people intuit that there is. But, if you look at the sun, you intuit that the sun is moving around us. Our intuitions are extraordinarily faulty. But if there is no such thing as free will, how can you send anyone to jail too? How can there be
Yeah.
consequences for actions if there is no such thing as free will? But this dovetails with the same problem that most atheists or anti-theists are familiar with when talking about religion, which is, well, how can you have ethics without a metaphysical grounding of some kind? Somebody giving a super system of ethics that supersedes everything that we have in this world? And the answer is there's plenty of ways to do it. Admittedly, defending it can sometimes get rather dodgy, but then again, so can defending any metaphysical system just as well. It all gets dodgy at some level in philosophy. So
yeah,
I
philosophy, goodness.
yeah, so I don't think it's a huge problem, but I think that's the way to think about it, which is the people who are deterministic say we've essentially removed this idea of a metaphysical you, of a you outside your body in any meaningful way and outside the natural world, meaning everything you do is determined exclusively by your physical makeup and your body's reaction to the environment, which is determined by, once again, that makeup and the sum total of all of your life experiences and how you have processed them, and that you, again, being something completely naturalistic. So when you have issues processing in the morning, to a determinist, it's like, okay, all that's done is influenced how you reach your decisions, but and it's short circuited. Your decision making process isn't as complete as it might otherwise be, but you're still using a decision making process. You're still using elements of it which are conscious, and many more that are not conscious, and that it's different than it would otherwise be under another set of circumstances doesn't change the fact that it is just as deterministic as it would be at any other time of the day. So the the fact that you are tired and still just waking up is just one factor that contributes to the deterministic nature of how you're going to reach your conclusions. It does not change those to say that they're not deterministic. It's just changed the set of factors we're starting with.
No, that's a good point. So, Michael, a lot of people would say that, well, what Nick was saying actually just now, and I've heard a lot of people mention that too. It's like, well, if everything is predetermined, then how do you send me to jail for doing something that, is it my fault? How do we work in a society where there is no free will? Do we have to? And a lot of people say, okay, yeah, there's no free will, but don't tell other people that. That's also a big joke. And uh, what would be your response to things along those lines?
Oh man, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I've heard this a lot, especially from students, because it's a legitimate problem, right? Um, I'm gonna do a stereotypical philosopher's answer and not answer the question, but talk about something else slightly instead. To let me preface a lot of this. So, to me, the conversations about free will versus determinism, like my background's mostly in the history of science. So when I look back at the course of the history of philosophy, I really see like I kind of split the question into two kind of different camps. One we've already been like talking about and working our way through, and this is like the metaphysical question of free will. And the metaphysical question of free will, as Nick already explained, ties into some other major big metaphysical questions like meta ethics, like how do we determine right from wrong, and then also questions about God and the nature of God. Like the conversation about free will is super important, especially for religious people, for the reasons we just listed. How could God punish people if there's no such thing as free will being the biggest question? So lots of big, heavy, heady metaphysical questions in one bubble, how I think of it anyway. And the other kind of approach to this, for me, looking back in the history of science, like these early conversations about the nature of free will are really conversations about what we would consider to be like early psychology. A lot of these philosophers, maybe not necessarily Plato, but for certain like Aristotle, St. Augustine, Aquinas, when they're talking about the capability of free will or the faculty of free will, they're really asking questions and making comments about the nature of how the brain is structured and how we make questions. So I kind of split those things into two, and that second part, when we're dealing with psychology, like a lot of those have been answered, and a lot of that fits firmly within the context of understanding psychology. But to go back to your original question, can you ask it for me again? I just wanted to say that first.
Um, it's kind of by ethics in
Yeah.
structuring a society the way we have it, if there is in fact no free will or
Um,
determinist view on free will.
I mean, that's yeah. I'm gonna actually defer to Nick
Nick,
on
you're
this
next.
because this is a
There's
big problem. Yeah, go ahead, Nick. You take
there's I
it
think
away.
two answers to that that are closely related. The first is, yeah, but it's deterministic, which means that all factors go into your decision making, and we can realize that there are important factors that we should add in. Society is not going to function if we don't have laws, and we discovered that a while ago. So we agreed to have laws, and you can get into how and why we developed ethics, what those ethical systems are, the necessity of having ethics in order to have survived as a species. If we had thought that it was okay to steal from your neighbors and do all these other things, we would not have been able to build a society that functions, and would have gone extinct quite some time ago. So we sit here and we say, we're going to punish crimes. Now, we do have in our laws actually, any number of, if you have to have mens rea, you have to have had the intention on some level to have committed a crime. So we already acknowledge that while ignorance is not a defense, if you honestly had no way of knowing that what you were doing was wrong, we don't usually punish that. So we assume you end up being, first of all, educated in our society as to in general what our ethics are, and then more specifically what the laws are, so that you can usually know what the laws are, and where you haven't read the actual codes, you can deduce accurately what the laws probably are. I haven't read the code on stealing, X, Y, or Z, or, doing X, Y, or Z, but I can guess whether or not our society permits it. And that is now going to be factored into my deterministic functioning and my processes when I reach a decision as to what I should or shouldn't do. Now that does strip away a number of things, although my emotions also feed into that, my desire to be liked in society and all of these other things. So this is a necessary component of building a society, and just that because we know ahead of time that it's going to influence you, that's why we're doing it. So, the only reason to have laws is for the very notion of the fact that they're going to convince you or deter you from doing something you shouldn't do, that we need to function. And the only way the laws work is if you will be punished for them. Because this factors into all of your decision-making process. And if you don't have other moral or ethical reasons or emotional reasons that have been factoring into your decision, at a minimum, hopefully the fact that, well, gee, if I get caught, I'm going to jail, will factor into it. Therefore, we can build a society, so on and so forth. So the fact that you don't have free will doesn't detract from the fact that this becomes a part of your decision-making process and is the only thing really that enables us to have a society.
Oh, wow.
And then there was a second one, but yeah.
What was it? Legal ethics, or what was your degree? Sorry.
Philosophy of law.
Law.
Oh, yeah. No, it was my concentration was in law and religion, but it was a BA in philosophy.
Philosophy of law or something you were saying. Yeah, and
Yeah.
we all thought, no, yeah, there's actually quite a few comments in here where it's just like, why is Nick here? See, guys, I had a plan. It's 4-dimensional chest. Nick comes in handy from time to time. I don't know. Scott Duke had a comment here, and I'm not sure if it wasn't just an epic troll comment. I do have a lot of trolls in my side chat.
Well, and it also gets back to so that was the second one, which is that even though it's deterministic, it's sort of like, okay, the weather is deterministic, right? So even though we can predict climate going pretty far out, we can't predict the weather successfully more than about 7 days. And no matter how advanced our supercomputers get, it gets so hard so quickly to process all the data. You get chaos theory. A butterfly flapping its wings in Japan creates a tornado in Dallas, Texas. You can't account for all of it. So it's just as in terms of and I'm actually not a fan of the pragmatist school of philosophy, but it's got its uses. I can't believe I just said that, but at any rate, Michael gets the joke. Okay. So the pragmatist aspect is, again, you have to believe in free will, and you can, because despite the fact that it doesn't exist, our ability to untether and unwrap all of the things that go into it, there's no way to do it. There's absolutely no way to do it. So for all intents and purposes, free will can be assumed to exist in the same way that a coin flip can be said to be random. I mean, how many times has somebody flipped a coin? How many times have you said this is random? And the fact that it actually wasn't had absolutely no bearing on the outcome of how you treated something. Weather is, again, another example. We treat weather as if it's random, because past 7 days out, it is. There's nothing, for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, and I would say to Scott's question, assuming that it's a genuine question, sounds genuine.
The first one.
Yeah. What common? I don't know if it's been. Yeah. Okay, our discussion about relevant without understanding of neuroscience. So I would say the two ought to somewhat go together. Now, philosophers have this really bad habit of being ignorant of science, believe it or not. I mean, every professional, once you get like uber specialized, you're really only concerned with the people that are also uber specialized in the thing that you're specialized in. But I think any good and this is my own personal bias here, but because I've already said that I think a lot of conversations about free will versus determinism have been taken over by psychology. So for me, when I see these sorts of conversations, I don't want it to just be metaphysical. I think there should be some sort of grounding. So, like in the area that I talk about, the philosophy of time, if I read through your entire article about your argument for B theory of time, and I don't notice any reference to relativity theory or quantum mechanics, I think we got a problem. So I would say that the same thing kind of applies here. If we're having conversations about the nature of free will, but we're also not factoring in the conversation about nature versus nurture in psychology, I think we got a problem because we're kind of divorcing it from the practical, concrete aspects of it that have already been explored by science. So I would say that yeah, for sure they should be connected.
I have a lot of thoughts on that, but I don't want to derail the stream with all my psychology talk. But yeah, I don't know how you have a conversation about free will without throwing psychology in it. But again, if you're probably anything that you are, you can like infuse like all of the world into it. And I'm like, nothing is never not psychology, you know. But I know poli sci majors say that too. Nothing is ever not,
Well,
political.
and physicists, right? Nothing is not
Yeah.
physics. I mean, and you can make the
But it, yeah,
same. Yeah, you can make the argument.
yeah,
Chemistry, what
exactly.
pick up. Yeah.
Do either of you know the answers to this? I'm wondering if he's referencing the Benet study? I forget. You guys know what the study is I'm thinking of. I hate that study, but I'll let you answer if you know it. I do not know the answer to this.
I don't either.
Not sure. Uh-uh.
And then let's see.
I will say the notion of free will was overturned, I think, by an understanding of neuroscience in general, simply because we were able to say, what is it? I think it was Carl Sagan who pointed out, okay, look, if you okay, either any neuron can be either fired or not fired. Now, there's an activation energy that reaches, the neuron will fire after a certain point, and you can get into how neural networks do a cascade of neurons firing to make a decision process. So it gets very complicated. But he did compare it to a linear processor in a computer. And he said, okay, if you were going to have a computer that had the number of neuron choices that you can get combinations of neurons that are either firing or not firing at the same time, the computer would have the base of Texas and the height of the Empire State Building. So we haven't even begun to really comprehend how many possible combinations of decisions that you can make. And obviously there are other faults in this. Not every neuron is involved in the kinds of decisions that we're talking about, but nonetheless, as a broad example, once we started to figure out too that we could mess with neurons, mess with neural chemicals, and get people to make different decisions, Occam's razor, we should not be adding unnecessary explanations. And the reality is, it seems like your entire decision-making process can be reduced down to neurons that are firing or not firing in very specific orders. And since there seems to be no necessity to add anything beyond that, it appears like just sort of a basic understanding of how neurons operate murdered the concept of free will.
Yeah, and building off of that, I would say that I don't know if I would phrase it as any ideas that were overturned or have been overturned by neuroscience. I would just say that the nature of the conversation has radically changed. So, like ancient and medieval conversations about free will, again, to me, are examples of like proto psychology, but they were talking about it using language that we just wouldn't use anymore. So like Plato developed his like tripartite theory of the soul. Aristotle talked about this sort of animating principle that allows is the kind of the basis for free will that allows us to make decisions, is this animating life force that we have. So those sorts of conversations rooted in metaphysics, that there's this like metaphysical basis for free choice, was uh, you know 15th, 16th, 17th century, largely overtaken with conversations of physiology, because now we have a better understanding about how the brain is structured and how the brain works. So language like mental facilities or mental faculties, language about like soul, language about like the root or the basis of free will largely gets replaced, I would say, overturned. I mean, I think that's a slightly different conversation,
I
but
would agree. I would agree. If you're
yeah.
gonna, if you know what, if you're gonna be pedantic about it, and if all of a sudden we really are in a philosophy class, okay, fine, fine. I'll watch what I say just a little closer. Jesus. Yes, I concur.
Uh,
Oh,
Not
dear
aimed at
Lord.
you specifically, but
my answer to this would be neither, but
oh,
does free will increase with blood alcohol level or decrease?
That's a, I really like that question, to be honest. Randomness increases with blood alcohol level. Let's say that. Um,
inhibition that prevents you from acting freely may decrease as well.
but this actually just gets right back to the example that I was saying, though. Your decisions are still completely 100% deterministic.
Yeah.
It's just there's other factors now. The alcohol has changed your brain chemistry and changed how your inhibition. That's why we say it's reduced your inhibitions, right? We are aware of the effect and how that effect is going to change how you make calculus in your own decisions. And that calculus, that's the other thing. We think of free will as having to be necessarily a conscious thing. And that's not necessarily true when we're talking, especially from, as I said before, like a compatibilist view.
Yeah, and apparently we haven't fleshed that out enough for Leo. So if
Yes,
you'd
yes.
like to, yeah, Leo, if you have a specific question about compatibilism, please let us know. We love to discuss it.
I don't know about Michael. Leo would bury me on those discussions.
Same,
But
probably. Leo's a
yeah,
smart guy.
yeah, yeah. So anyways, that's it. It's
Sorry,
still
I cut you
it doesn't
off.
change the math, in my view.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. The way I think about free will is, I have he's over 20 now, but haven't had a teenage boy who's very much into video games, like a liking everything to a video game. And if you think about like, you have all these, you still have choice. There's still a lot of choices, and it's knowing yourself. uh, Usually, the best you can do, and again, go down a psychology rabbit hole. But there are things that you are more want to do, and so knowing yourself, you would want to give yourself the most choices because you know that which road you're most likely to take. So it doesn't free will doesn't eliminate choices, but of all the choices you have, which one are you most likely to take? And so that is going to vary depending on your mental state, certainly. Like I said, if you're sleepy or if you're alert or if you're drunk or if you're high, you're going to take different roads. It doesn't change the determinist nature. It's like Nick was saying, if I go back in time and I'm still high, am I going to still make this bad decision? Yeah. If I go back in time, you smack the joint out of my hand, I'm more likely to take a different path. So, it's, yeah. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
did I cut somebody off?
no. I was just gonna build off what you said. Go.
Before you do, hold on
Yeah.
a sec, because I would like to interject with. She didn't cut me off, but I would like to do the dejected or the really up. She's, you didn't have to invite me if you didn't want to let me finish my sentences.
Obligatory.
Jesus, what do you? What? All right, thank you. I wanted a minute because Maya was giving me a hard time before the start of the show, so I kind of got
I
it. Anyway,
give you a hard time all the day. You
yes,
should
you do.
Oh
And
my
I
God.
agreed to
I was
this.
just ripping into Nick on the concept of wanting a Christian God in a side chat the other day. I was just like, does he hate me that?
Yeah, I recall. So I have some. So I've been saving up all that indignation and angst and anger for just like now. But Michael is great and let me cut it. You see, I cut him off, and he's actually being really a gentleman about it. So,
Such a
you know,
gentleman.
uh,
Oh no, well, thank you for the compliment, I suppose. Um,
Leo, would you like in? You seem
yeah, I'm not really sure where I don't have like a not something I have a super strong opinion about. I mean, if I was forced to choose, it would be a type of compatibilism, I guess. But that's like me choosing, like me talking about like political stuff. I'm just largely ignorant, so I don't talk about it. I just leave it to Maya and Nick to talk about. But yeah, so compatibilism, how I think of it is largely through the lens of psychology, kind of using the sorts of examples that you just gave, Maya. So compatibilism is this idea that some version of free will can coexist, or the idea that free will isn't inherently logically opposed to determinism, or determinism doesn't logically eliminate free will, is how I should have phrased that. And the way that I think about it is in a little bit more concrete terms, in the way that Maya was just talking about it. I think about this within the terms of the like nature versus nurture debate, and I think it really rears its heads in conversations about like something I may or may not have experience with, which is like addiction, right? So I think compatibilism illustrate one way to illustrate it would be to talk about something like the fact that addiction can be has a genetic component to it,
Hmm.
right? You can genetically be predisposed to something like alcoholism.
Hmm.
But of course, the classic scenario, well, what if I was stranded on an island and didn't have access to alcohol? Would I be an alcoholic? Well, no, right? But this is how I understand compatibilism, in the sense that there are certain biological features in our lives that we are predisposed to various levels. I also don't view this as like some sort of like harmonious across the board sort of determinism, that we are determined towards a particular outcome. I think about it more in terms of, did my camera just go out? That's weird.
Nick's. Wow, what just happened? Did mine?
Oh,
Mike froze.
that's
Nick
strange.
left completely.
No, we all, yeah. No, I needed a second.
What happened?
That's weird. Anyway, y'all can still hear me though, right?
Yes.
No, I can't. I can't hear a thing you're saying.
Okay. I'll try to figure it out. So yeah, what I'm saying is, to me, it's not like when people say hard determinism, I'm a little hesitant to go down that route, because it seems to suggest that, every single action and every single outcome is predetermined. Predetermined by who would be one of my questions. But I think about it more in terms of the likelihood that a certain outcome is going to occur. So, and I don't want this to turn into personal therapy, but my father was an alcoholic. My grandfather was an alcoholic. Most of the people in my family struggled with addiction. Am I going to struggle with addiction? Am I going to have addictive problems? Well, most likely, right? Because the cards have been sort of stacked in that direction. But it's not like a absolute concrete guarantee. And this is where, for me, compatibilism kind of comes into play, because there's still a matter of at least a perception of choice, but it's also not like a concrete guarantee that a certain outcome at a certain time is guaranteed to happen. Is just what I was going to say.
Well, I'd like to piggyback off of that for one second, because Maya had said also predetermined, and determinism and predetermined are two very different things.
Right,
They're
right, right.
they're not necessarily
I didn't even
unrelated,
conflate those.
depending on how you. Yeah, well, it depends on assumptions you make, and how you choose to look at it as to whether you can conflate them or not. But predetermined suggests that there is in fact an agent of some kind that has made this decision and done it. If there is such an agent, at least in naturalism and determinism as I'm using it, it would be nature in and of itself. But it's not that we have any evidence of any agent or entity that has predetermined these things. It's just you cannot have an action that is not a direct consequent of all of the actions before it. And when you think about that, that actually, in my view, makes kind of sense, right? I mean, has there ever been an action that has been the result of anything except the actions before it that directly influenced it? It seems like you couldn't really have that. Now, what that means, that the reason then we use the word determinism, is that what that really means is every action was determined by the as a consequence of all of the previous actions that came before it that had a influence on it one way or another, and was not affected by anything that didn't directly affect it, which sounds like you're saying something that should be patently obvious. But if you're talking about, for example, metaphysics or something supernatural, then you'd say, okay, was there something supernatural, or was it just determined as a result of all the naturalistic contributions to it? So it seems like everything is determined only by the and necessarily by the all of the things that led up to it. Again, it's chaos theory, the butterfly flapping its wings. That does not mean that it's predetermined. That doesn't mean that my future is necessarily set in that way. It seems like it
Right.
must,
Like,
but it
sorry,
doesn't.
not to
And
cut you off, but kind of like what I was saying at the
yeah,
beginning of the stream, at the Big Bang, I was predetermined to have the stream. It's like that's not what we're saying here.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, there you go. So I'll just be repeating myself if I continue. So,
No worries. Slowly making my way through the chat questions. If you guys,
well, I had a question for Michael. So, um,
okay.
because I think you've studied some of the higher end philosophy probably more than I have. In your view, do you think that Maya was determined to be a troll, or well, let me rephrase it. Do you think that she is just like a bad person in general, or not a good person? Which of the two would you most lean towards? And take your time. I'm aware that this could be a complicated question. Oh, he's muted. Listen,
Wow, tech God,
if
strike
you think she's a
again.
bad person, just
Damn
don't
it
say anything
all.
at
Guess
all,
we will never
and
know.
well, I get it. I get it. You
She
don't
was
want to say.
determined.
I
She was
understand. I
predetermined
wouldn't
not to
either.
answer that question.
Yeah, we no, I understand. Whatever answer you want to give, clearly you don't
If
want to
there's
give
nothing else
publicly.
to
I
do but
feel the same.
assume that I am a perfect little angel and to move on.
You're still muted.
Still muted.
It looks like the stream had a hiccup and kind of reset, so you may have to just disconnect and reconnect your audio. Well, let me answer for you. So Maya clearly is. I'm gonna shut up before I get myself in genuine trouble.
All right. So Spackle is calling psychology a soft science. She's banned permanently and forever.
Oh, oh,
I'm gonna have to see. I don't want to be
she
a
also said
science.
not all trolls are bad, and
But
I completely
I
agree.
think I don't know. I
Uh,
think some trolls are bad, and
Oh,
Spackle just proved that.
only the ones that troll me are bad. I'm okay with all the others.
That's like your entire mod team.
It is, I know, right? It's like if you troll Nick, you get a wrench on in time. I haven't figured out how that works yet.
No, it's
Can
part
y'all
of the
hear me?
N10
Yes,
mod
yes, we
training
can.
program.
Oh, okay. Gee, I don't. Yeah, my camera cut out and then my microphone cut out. It's a great
I can hear
great day
you.
for tech problems, supposedly.
I know.
No,
No,
Nick brings the tech demons. I'm
It,
telling you.
it that is the one piece of evidence I've ever found for something metaphysical, because I can't explain the fact that there seems to be a field of tech failures everywhere I go.
no, I was just gonna say I came on here to tell both of you heathens that I think that Maya was specially created and preordained by God to have the positions that she has. So,
Here we go.
no,
All right, this conversation is about to take a left turn, folks. Yeah.
oh, just kidding, just kidding. Oh,
Yeah, I think Spackle right here, and again, this is like 10 minutes ago. It's kind of saying what you guys have been saying.
yeah, I would say that kind of building off of what I was saying earlier, that I think you could potentially choose different. The idea that I wanted to get across, and I think this would fall into the camp of compatibilism, is just that you're predisposed to certain types of actions. I kind of want to move away from the idea that because I think inherently a sort of religious idea that every single action and every single outcome of those actions have been like predetermined, right?
So that's more of a libertarian view of it, correct?
I don't know if that would be. It might. I didn't consider myself a proponent of libertarian free will, but I hope I'm not. But maybe
No,
I
like the
am.
religious aspect
Oh
of
yeah,
free will, and
right.
which I don't know. Sometimes I have to like go back to my Catholic roots, and I'm like, I see it, but I think it's just a bad understanding of what free will is, and again, the conflation of free choice and free will.
So you see, and I would argue if you're arguing what I think you're arguing, which you may not be, I don't know. I'll clarify sort of what my response to that would be. So that's why it's important to understand the difference between determinism and predetermined. Because
Yeah.
predetermined does in fact imply an agent. Determinism just implies that there's a set of rules and everything adheres to those rules, period, end of discussion. In my view, if you're not going to be a determinist, then that's actually going to end up having to be a metaphysical claim, because you have to make a claim then that something outside the rules of nature has influenced how you're making your decisions. Something non-physical in that sense. So but that's why it's very important, in my view, when talking about determinism, to explicitly say determinism and not conflate it with being predetermined, because those are two different things and they import different things. Also, as to Spackle's earlier comment about making decisions, that's also why I like the thought experiment about time travel. Just go back 10 seconds, would you make a different decision? And if we are slaves to the rules of naturalism, or to the rules of nature, then it seems to me you could not make any other decision were all of the circumstances identical. You would have to behave the way you did. And how and why that doesn't necessitate predetermined is a long, complicated, drawn out thing. But the lack of agency is one of them. It's just a set of rules that it appears exist, are universal, and while we don't understand all of them, we don't know all of them, and probably never will. It does not mean or entail that anyone can or ever is acting outside of them. And if you were, metaphysics. Nope. Well, I won't be able to hear anyone for about 20 seconds. I should not have said that now, because now Maya can, you know what? I can still talk. My mic is still going. So I'm just going to over talk until, okay, I got my sound back.
I don't know. This seems to be a really big conversation going on in the chat. And I want to preface any answers to this by saying none of us are qualified to answer it. And then I'm going to push them to answer it.
Let me give you the answer that I'm really completely unqualified to.
Well, let me, yeah, let's start off by saying that if you're actually considering this question, please seek professional help ASAP. I'm always hesitant to bring in conversations of suicide into philosophical problems just because, you know, it's something that people actually struggle with and might actually be struggling with. So,
From what I can tell on the chat, and again, not qualified to assess this, it's just mental masturbation. I would have
oh,
intervened if I thought it was a serious question, but they're really just trying to figure out what free will is here.
gotcha. And yeah, this is, I'm going to complicate it further by the fact that, not to go too much down the psychology route, because again, you shouldn't be listening to anything I say with respect to psychology. But even the desire to harm yourself can be a result of, well, mental illness first and foremost, which is a warped, distorted view of what reality actually is. Oftentimes, people with suicidal ideation come to those conclusions based off of a false sense of reality. So, is it a free choice? This kind of relates back to the legal question of whether or not people are free to do actions that harm themselves, or whether or not they should be judged by it in turn. But I don't think that it would prove free will in that respect, because then you could just turn around and say that the person was genetically predisposed to act that way, because there might be a genetic component to things like self-harm.
Well, it's not just genetics. I would argue that the same deterministic factors would apply. They apply to all actions. We do have a very strong desire to live. Things on occasion override that desire for one reason or another. We have some understanding of some of the causes of that and how and why, and we're confused about others. Self-harm, cutting behaviors, stuff like that, they're done for any number of reasons. One of them, it releases endorphins, and those endorphins, as it turns out, can help reduce mental anguish as well as physical pain. So when your body's in physical pain, it can reduce mental pain as well. So some people have engaged in those behaviors as a relief to pain. Alcohol is the same thing. Alcohol is a depressant, long-term, short-term. The reason alcohol is so bad is it works. If it didn't work, nobody would take it. It works to alleviate, at least in the short term, some forms of suffering. So that's why you take it, and that's why people engage in self-destructive behaviors, is they do sometimes achieve other goals that, for whatever deterministic reasons, somebody has found ultimately very important. A true suffering, and when you talk about, say, euthanasia, true human suffering can reach a point where, people say, well, I've got stage 4, whatever kind of cancer, and I'm going to keep, and you'll find that those decisions are, in my view, deterministic, and whether you agree that somebody should be permitted to do it or not. I think most of us can understand at least how somebody could get to a point where they could be thinking like that. How we deal with that, what we're going to do about that, those are all questions for society. Those are all questions. But in terms of the determinism of it, the suicide is not any kind of, in my view, argument against determinism in any way. It's just as deterministic as any other action we're talking about.
Here's an interesting question.
I'm going to take the same view I used at the beginning in terms of compatibilism, and I think, Michael, yeah, you and I have a different view of what compatibilism is. I don't know that one of us is right or wrong. Obviously, either I'm right or you're wrong, but we don't have to get into that right now. But in terms of, however, it doesn't actually matter. What matters is at least that we understand the definitions that the other one's using and can operate within those. Okay, again, a coin flip. Is it random? No. Does that matter? 99.9999% of the time, no. You still start a football game with a coin flip. You still have two kids who are arguing over X, Y, and Z, coin flip, randomness. It matters, by the way, with computers, right? I mean, most people know this. When you get into high-end of computers, the fact that we can't actually do anything random starts to become a serious problem when it comes to encryption. But short of that, no, it doesn't matter. So you can say that randomness exists. You can say that luck exists and that chance exists. And it's actually really useful to be able to say that, right? Because you can say, well, if I'm lucky, this and this will happen. And we all know what you mean. And it helps and aids with communication. Is it entirely accurate? No. Then again, 99.9% of communication is wildly inaccurate as well. So it's just sort of like we understand what the import is, and as long as we can communicate effectively, most of the time, the fact that free will does not exist, the fact that randomness does not exist, luck does not exist, is completely irrelevant to any conversation right now.
Yeah, I would just actually echo what Leo said in the chat. If by luck you mean like a form of like indeterminism, then yeah, sure, it can be. It can be a thing. It is a thing, at least at a quantum level. But the words luck or chance has different connotations. So again, not to get too hung up on word use, but it really would depend on what you mean by luck or chance, I would say. But I like indeterminism better, or indeterministic. Yeah.
All right.
That's the philosopher's answer. Well, define these terms first. Then you could just keep going forever, right? You could just keep going. Well, what do you mean by this? Well, what do you mean by that? Oh, folks, I've just finished teaching my philosophy class. It's been a good class.
It matters sometimes, but yeah. I would prefer, indeterministic rather than luck. Anyway,
What was that? The guy who pulled over the police officer pulls over Heisenberg and it was you can do Heisenberg, Bohr, and a whole bunch of others. Heisenberg and Schrodinger goes up to Heisenberg and says, "You know how fast you were going?" And he goes, "No, but I know exactly where I was." So, okay, smart ass, get out of the car. Gets Heisenberg and Schrodinger out of the car. Takes Schrodinger to the back. They pop the trunk. Officer goes, "Hey, you realize you got a dead cat here?" And Schrodinger goes, "Yeah, I do now."
right.
Oh, come on, that's funny.
I gotcha. You get lost when you tell Heisenberg how fast he was going. Yeah.
Let's see. Does anyone, like, I'm arguing with somebody in the chat. I'm trying to look for questions. We're going to wind down. Does anyone have any questions before, for anyone in the panel before we conclude? And do you guys have anything that you want to add that maybe I haven't asked or hasn't been brought up?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that.
Yeah, I would too.
Yeah.
Not opposed to that. It's probably what my approach would be. Yeah. And on these terms, I would probably go with Nick's understanding of compatibilism over and against mine, because again, not my cup of tea.
Well, and I mean, the other thing is, okay, so I used to debate theists a lot, and I honestly don't care what a lot of people who debate say. Well, I have to define faith, and we're going to use faith the way I define. I don't care how they define faith. I care that the definition doesn't change. That I care about. I care that we have a definition, and they can use it one way. I can use it another way, as long as we're aware of how each person is using it and accommodating to that usage. You can have a delightful conversation. You just have to be aware that, and you don't, if you get stuck in which one's the correct one,
Right.
You derail a whole bunch of conversations. They can all be correct depending on a perspective, and oftentimes that's what you're arguing about. So sit and acknowledge that's how they're using it, this is how I'm using it, and then just keep that in mind as you're having the discussion, and you can have a fruitful discussion. Getting into this, no, my definition is the correct one is absolutely worthless. Huge waste of time, except when I'm arguing with Michael, in which case I think it's important that we recognize that.
Right. I would agree with that.
Let's see.
I used to debate theists a lot, and that was one. And I talked to other people who were, right before they went on a debate, modern day debates or whatever, and they're like, "Well, I'm gonna suck them into this definition of faith or whatever." I was like, "Let them use whatever. It doesn't. Let them use whatever definition they want. The one thing you have to do is make sure they don't do three-card Monty. They start with faith as trust, and then it's faith as blind faith. No, they don't get to change it, but they get to define it. And by the way, I get to define atheists. So, have fun with that one. You don't like my definition? Fine. Call me. When I was debating the theist a while back, and he was just like, okay, by my definition, you're agnostic. I was like, okay, fine. Call me agnostic. Let's finish the discussion. I don't care. As long as you understand what I'm saying, I don't care.
All right. So just real quick, I made a comment to, I believe it's Ian McKenna, that philosophy is usually married to like an actual science. And I believe the response was, philosophy/religion has no place in science.
Ouch.
I would be delighted to take that, but I will ask Michael if he wants to go first. I think we're each tickled by that one.
Sure. Well, I'm going to quote a philosopher here, which probably defeats the point. But there was a philosopher he's still alive, I think. A philosopher named Daniel Dennett who said that there's no such thing as philosophy-free science. So Most scientific ideas make philosophical assumptions. Not only that, but historically speaking, all science comes from philosophy. Science is just a branch of natural philosophy. So yeah, I would need for them to unpack that statement a little bit to explain what exactly they mean by that, because historically, that's not true. And then pragmatically, philosophically, there's all sorts of scientific theories that make philosophical assumptions. Relativity theory assumes B theory of time, for example. So yeah, you need to unpack that statement a little bit.
Next comment.
Philosophy is the basement for nearly every single science or other branch of anything you can think of. The basement of it is philosophy. It all started with philosophy. There would be no science without philosophy. Now, what happens is, as philosophy gets more and more acute and specific in certain areas, then it branches off into something else, and then science, poof, comes off from philosophy. That doesn't mean it's divorced from philosophy. That doesn't mean that its philosophical roots aren't still important. And that doesn't mean that philosophy doesn't still tinker with it and every now and then upend it. Hume's problem of induction is one of my favorite ones, which completely upended how science was done. And this was a philosopher saying, science may have a problem here. And then Bacon and any number of others sitting here trying to address it that have managed to improve science by acknowledging problems that philosophers have annoyingly said, yeah, you can't really say or do what you think you're saying or doing. Everybody hates it. If you're a good philosopher, most people dislike you, and that's great. But without philosophy continuing to challenge science in ways that make scientists really upset, it's kind of fun too, to be honest. But at any rate, without that, science would not continue to grow. Science does not just grow vertically in terms of adding new layers of knowledge. It grows horizontally by being challenged by and improved by the work of philosophers to this very day. They are inexorably tied. The basic philosophical functioning of logic is part of the fundamental the grounding of all science. It's the exact same grounding, and science got it all from philosophy and continues to rely on philosophy for how to do all of that fundamental framework correctly. They are inexorably tied together, and I haven't heard any credible argument against that ever.
No, yeah, I agree. So now we're going on the chat's going on kind of a philosophy tangent, which I don't want to. That could be its own separate stream, And- which is awesome. I love seeing the back and forth in the chat. I'm going to leave that to the chat. I agree with what both of you just said. I'm trying to listen to you, keep up with the conversation, and make my own points in the chat. And that is exactly what I meant when I said that. A lot of, for me, it's like, well, philosophy is just mental masturbation until you can get a science to back it up. It's kind of my stance. And then, again, it's not to say that there's no, I mean, yeah, I mean, we wouldn't be where we are without philosophy there, like pushing the sciences
And
forward.
that's not an unfair view. That is not an unfair view. It really isn't. But there's nuance, and
Right. No, no,
sometimes only
no.
a philosopher can.
100%. Just not trying to go off in a separate
Yeah, yeah.
stream. Just trying to clarify my point to the people in the chat. I think Ian needs his own stream to answer kind of a lot of the questions. Ian, I'm glad you're here. I love that you're making everyone think and reaffirm. A lot of times, I don't. When someone pushes me on a thought, it forces me to better flesh out the thought. Uh, right wingers do this to me a lot, but so I do appreciate it, and I don't want you to think I don't. But what I'm going to say is that I find that you're moving the goalpost a little bit here. Um,
Well, and to be fair, what did the employed philosopher say to the unemployed philosopher? Would you like fries with that? I mean, it's not like he's completely wrong. Okay, I do get what he's saying. I just
Ouch!
think he's missed a
Jesus.
few. Yeah. Well, that's why I didn't get my PhD, to be quite honest. I was considering it for a while, but
I mean, you got to pay it off.
Yeah, yeah. Listen,
Who
we don't
could
have
do
to
that
talk
at
about that.
McDonald's?
We don't have to talk about that.
All right. So I think I'm not saying other. Again, this is a stream that I did because there were a lot of people in the community that were having questions about philosophy. I mean, philosophy about free will, and I wanted to have it be its actual own discussion. And there are a lot of science channels that do that, but I wanted I wanted something to be by the community for the community, and I really do appreciate both of you for coming in and helping me do that. And if anyone has any questions, please leave them in the comments um, here, or I don't see any other questions coming from the chat. So I guess we're going to wind down. Mr. Granado, do you have anything coming up this week?
I think this was the last thing. I'm gonna be out of town next week, so probably nothing coming out in the next 2 weeks. But I appreciate you having me on here, Maya. This was a whole lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, I really
And
appreciate you
Nick,
for
nice
coming.
to
Thank you.
hang out with you again.
All right, and what's your channel?
Oh, it's just Michael Granado. I do like educational stuff as well as some handful of live streams where I talk about like anime and silly stuff, in addition to philosophy videos and stuff for my classes. So yeah, feel free to check it out.
Nick, what do you have coming up this week?
so my channel is In Time. It's news, politics, and culture. We discuss all sorts of things, including topics like this. We sometimes interview professors of philosophy, bring them on, discuss various things. We also talk about politics, what's going on in the world. We have coming up a couple of discussions. We've been doing weekly discussions with Commander Lance McMillan. He helped stage the Iraq War for the Fifth Fleet out of CENTCOM. He is extremely knowledgeable about wars and how they are prosecuted. He's been helping us with the Iraq War, and also what he believes is signs of a revolutionary war that's actually already started, a cold revolutionary war that's started in the U.S. So we talk about interesting topics like that. And then on Friday, we're going to have Operator Starsky. He is a Ukrainian National Guardsman. He's been on the front lines right now. He's been sort of pulled back to Kyiv, but we get to talk to him every Friday afternoon. He talks to us about what's going on in the Ukraine war, and we usually dovetail McMillan in on that and try to sort out what we're seeing and what we're expecting in the coming future, and why we believe this war is one that needs to be followed and discussed. So those are the two things that we have coming up next week.
Beautiful. And do you see the war in Ukraine winding down this year, ending this
No.
year? Interesting.
Not right now. The only way it can end that I can see is if Putin is removed from office, which would have to be done, deposed with extreme prejudice, is what we're kind of banting around on In Time, and he would have to be replaced with somebody who is less inclined to prosecute that war, and all of the major candidates to replace him would be more inclined. So their losses have been significant, but they have such a big population they can keep throwing prisoners, drunks, people with Alzheimer's at it, which is what they're doing. They're literally grabbing people off the street and saying, here's a gun, go. Oh, no, sorry, don't aim it at the rest of your people. No, aim at that. No, aim at that. Aim at that. The number of friendly fire incidents has gone up dramatically. That's what. But they are going to keep doing that. They're going to keep doing that, and there's any number of reasons I don't see it ending this year.
That's a shame. Titan, thank you for throwing the links in there for Michael and Nick. Can't talk today. And gentlemen, I would like to thank you for coming to the stream. So again, not seeing other questions, so we're gonna go out, and I need an end screen thing. Nick has a very nice one, but we're all gonna. I guess I'm gonna follow the way of Mike Granado, and we're just gonna say bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.